Hello, everyone. Tonight we are standing at the edge of a forgotten river. Not one you'd find on any map today, and certainly not one you'd ever want to drink from. It doesn't babble or rush or sparkle. It oozes, it whispers, and it waits. You squint into the heavy dusk, the ground beneath you brittle and strangely soft, like stepping on a stack of old books wrapped in dried glue. There's no breeze. The trees nearby, what's left of them, seem to lean back from the bank's roots, exposed like gnarled fingers caught mid-scramble. Something's wrong here, and you feel it even before the first fossil juts out like a broken tooth from the dust. This is where time cracked open and forgot to seal itself shut. A place so saturated in death that it gave up trying to hide it. A riverbed turned trap, turned graveyard, turned museum floor, turned YouTube topic for your late-night insomnia binge. You probably won't survive here just like the million others who didn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments so I know where my fossil hunting night owls are watching from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along the cracked bank, each footstep puffing a little plume of gray silt into the air, soft and clinging. The place smells like sunburnt clay, ghost water, and something faintly metallic. You bend down. A rib cage, two-thirds buried, curled inward like the thing it belonged to, died hugging itself. Here's the thing. Most people forget about fossil beds. They aren't just random. Something happened to trap everything in one place. A kill site, a drought line, a collapsed cave. Or, in this case, a river that refused to let go. You glance toward the basin, and even though there's no water now, the shape is unmistakable. Wide, meandering, wound through with ridges like the scarring of ancient floods. This isn't just a riverbed, it's a story told in calcium and stone. Geologists call formations like this a Lagerstätte, a German word that sounds like a beer but means a fossil jackpot. You're standing in one now. Some of the most famous include China's Liaoning beds or Germany's Messel pit, but this one, it stayed a secret for ages, hidden in plain sight. You crouch beside a sunken hoofprint hardened into rock. Next to it, something strange. Not a predator's claw or a tail drag, just a dent, like something heavy fell and didn't get back up. It's that silence again. The stillness you feel when a story gets too close to its final line. The river here didn't rush, it crawled. During wet seasons, it sprawled out like a lazy animal, forming shallow pools. During dry seasons, it dried into a treacherous crust that cracked like pottery over hidden pits of sludge. Step wrong and you wouldn't even get a scream out before you disappeared. Historians still debate whether this was a seasonal crossing point or a year-round death trap. Some argue that the river's kill rate only spiked during long droughts when animals grew desperate. Others think it was always like this, a fatal illusion of safety, the way a Venus flytrap seems harmless until it isn't. You wander farther, dragging your fingers across the stone. Here's a partial jawbone still holding a single tooth. There's a patch of petrified reeds, flattened and shiny like stone seaweed. You wonder what it sounded like back then, sloshy, buzzing with insects, echoing with distant bellows. You wonder what it would feel like to be the last thing still moving while others were already sinking. Odd fact for the night. Fossils aren't always bones. Sometimes it's poop. Paleontologists call them coprolites, which sounds like a coffee substitute but is really fossilized dung. They love those. Tells them who ate what, who passed what, and whether things were going terribly wrong on a digestive level. That's real science, by the way. So this river, it's got bones. It's got footprints. It's got coprolites. But most importantly, it's got moments. Panic hesitation, the last swerve of a head before the mud closed over. And somehow, through a miracle of timing and chemistry, it kept them all. You glance up. The landscape widens now, and in the distance, the outline of a rock formation looks suspiciously like a skull. It's just erosion. Probably, but even so, the chill runs through you, sharp electric grounding. You're not alone here, not really, because every footprint here was left by something that thought it would make it. Every fossil was a heartbeat interrupted, and every rib cage in the earth used to hold in a breath. The wind picks up. It smells of dust and old water. You step over a hollow where something large once flailed, scrape marks on stone, claw gouges in a spiral. A dance of death. You say nothing. You listen. In the distance, a raven lands on a jagged post of stone. It cocks its head. Probably just a bird. Probably not your problem. Still, the ground here feels soft again, just like when you first arrived. You take another step. The dust puffs up once more, clings to your boots, and you wonder how long it takes for footsteps to become history. You hear it before you see it. The ghost sound of slow thunder, as if the river still remembers how to move. But the truth is stranger. This river never really raged. It crept, it swelled, it sulked, and then like any good predator, it waited. You're tracing the bend of what used to be its widest arc. A crescent of silty ridges now hardened into dry hills like someone froze a wave mid-surge. Back in the Mesozoic, this wasn't a picturesque stream with babbling charm. It was a bloated thing, heavy with minerals and secrets. It would drag trees out by the root change course mid-season and abandon old channels like last year's regrets. Historians still debate whether the flow here was fed mostly by glacial melt seasonal rains, or something more exotic, perhaps even underground springs that surged up from the crust like hiccups in the Earth's memory. What they do agree on is that this river didn't just move water, it moved time. Layer after layer, it laid down sediment like sheets on a bed, fine sand in one era, sticky clay in another, volcanic ash like powdered memory in between. And each of those layers became a vault. You step carefully across a tilted slab that was once a riverbank, now angled like a frozen landslide. You can see it clearly, striations in the rock like lines in an old notebook. There's a pinkish-gray seam running through it that geologists go feral over. That's the clay line from a particularly violent flood season, the one that buried everything under 2 meters of silt in less than a week. Imagine that you're a turtle waddling back from a nesting trip and whoosh, now you're a fossil in waiting. The river, being the dramatic artist it was, didn't trap things all at once. No, it was picky. First, it would lull a herd in with shallow banks and a promise of drinkable water. Then it would sink its grip. The soft spots, what paleontologists call consolidated mudflats, were deceiving. Step on one, and it was like stepping into a melted pudding. Some animals got out, some didn't. You can guess which ones we're here for. Here's something weird in places where the river's current once slackened. Say around bends or oxbow lakes, it didn't just slow down, it reversed. It would swirl back on itself, trapping vegetation, drowning insects, suffocating fish in pockets of low oxygen. A kill zone created not by violence but by laziness, death by stillness. Odd fact. There's a species of prehistoric fish found in this fossil bed that doesn't exist anywhere else. Paleontologists found only one complete specimen right inside the gill arch of a larger predator. It was either a last meal or a very unlucky roomie. And still, the layering is what gets you. If you cut down through the stone with a chainsaw, don't you're not qualified, you'd pass through time itself. Cretaceous at the top, Jurassic deeper. A little slice of Triassic if you're lucky, and dig like your grant money depends on it. Each band a snapshot, each color a mood. You're standing now in a shallow dip where the river once braided into several channels. These braids would change with every season, leaving behind marooned sandbars. And those perfect ambush zones. Not for predators, but for sediment. Imagine a stegosaur stuck in belly-deep mud roaring for help that won't come. Flies already circling. The buzzards too. That's where you're standing. You brush aside a patch of loose dust and reveal a ripple-mark stone frozen in the shape of water's last caress. The irony. We have no recordings of the river's sound, no idea what the wind through its reeds once whispered. But we have this fossils of the moment just before silence. Geologists use a term called overbank deposits. That's when a river floods and spills beyond its usual channel, leaving debris and fine particles across the surrounding land. In this river's case, overbanking meant a lottery of doom. You might find a fern, a frog, and a foot-long theropod all side by side in the same square meter. And that mess, that's exactly what preservation loves. Organics tangled in silt gently compressed over thousands of years until every cell either mineralized or vanished. The bones you're looking at. They're not just bones. They're fossils soaked with iron, calcium, and regret. You pause by a collapsed bank wall where a jumble of ribs, rocks, and root casts form a chaotic knot. You'd think it's a fluke, a mass death pile. But there are 20 more just like it downstream. And upstream. And all through the dried guts of the river. Why? Because this wasn't a one-time event. It was tradition. Historians still argue whether some of these mass deaths were caused by flash floods, poisonous algae blooms, or shifting magnetic fields that confused migration patterns. But here's a fun twist. Some modern birds inherit these same migratory paths. And guess what? Some of them still crash into places they shouldn't, guided by a compass tuned millennia too old. So maybe your GPS is smarter than theirs, or maybe not. You look up again, squinting into the cracked horizon. The shape of the land hasn't changed much. You could almost trace where the river once coiled. The soil still remembers. The fossils still whisper. And here beneath your feet the river sleeps. But it hasn't forgotten how to kill. The first time you see it, you think it's just another rock rounded split down the middle, a dusty gray like everything else here. But then you notice the groove. A perfect impression of what used to be a tail lined with delicate vertebrae, no thicker than a pencil lead. And beside it, a smear of mineralized tissue barely wider than a shoelace, but unmistakably skin. Mud minerals and monstrous misfortune, that's the recipe. You crouch, tracing the fossil with the tip of your glove. The texture's uncanny, not quite smooth, not quite rough, almost like dried fruit left too long in the sun. You know you shouldn't touch it, but you do, just once. It's colder than the air around it, somehow. This was no ordinary riverbed. Most rivers, if they bury you, grind you up in the process, tumbling bones, scattering pieces, dragging you half a mile downstream before anything settles. But here, something strange happened. Over and over again, the river trapped entire creatures almost exactly where they died. Some collapsed mid-stride. Some curled into death poses. Some looked surprised. Geologists call the preservation exceptional. Paleontologists get a little dreamy when they talk about it, like describing a first love. Because this river didn't just fossilize bones, it fossilized moments. We're talking soft tissue, internal organs, feathers and fur, sometimes even the contents of a creature's last meal. You think that's rare? It is, like lottery-level rare. And yet, here you are, standing in a riverbed that's done it a million times. Odd fact, volcanic ash played a big role. Not in the obvious eruption kills everything way, but as a fine dusting that sealed corpses in silt like icing on a tragic cake. Some layers of this river are laced with microscopic glass shards from eruptions hundreds of miles away. When rain followed an ash fall, it turned the soil into a suffocating paste. Animals already weakened by drought or injury would get caught, sink slowly, and then if conditions were just right, be perfectly preserved. Historians still debate whether the volcanic activity made this region deadlier or luckier in fossil terms. You know, glass half full of bones. You wander farther now toward a bend, where the sediment builds into a bluff like a crumbling wedding cake. Exposed on its face is a time sandwich alternating stripes of reddish clay, pale limestone, and charcoal gray mudstone. That last one's the sweet spot, the one that seems to carry the best preserved fossils. And in it, a herd, or what's left of one. You recognize the shape even before the details register. A row of snouts turned toward where the river once ran. Bodies hunched, knees folded, like they were resting or waiting. But they weren't waiting. They were sinking. This wasn't a flood event. The layering's too calm. No churning, no debris tangle. This was a slow entrapment, what paleontologists call a quiescent death assemblage. That's science speak for a bunch of things died gently but terribly. You can almost see it, a matriarch sniffing the air, nostrils flaring. Calves crying softly. One takes a cautious step, sinks a little, yanks its foot back. Then tries again, and again, until it can't pull free. Eventually, the rest follow. There's something heartbreakingly domestic about it. You imagine the calls they made, low and confused. You wonder if any tried to pull their siblings free. If any succeeded. Probably not. The skeletons here don't scatter, they cluster. The deeper you go into the river story, the more it stops feeling like an accident. It starts to feel like a trap. Not a malicious one, rivers don't have intentions. But you begin to suspect this one enjoyed its reputation, that it reveled in the role of record keeper, each fossil, a new entry in its long, muddy diary. You step around the edge of the bluff where erosion has sculpted an overhang. It's shady here. Cool. And there in the shadow, something glimmers. You brush back a patch of dust, and there it is, the impression of a wing. Not the bat-like limbs of a pterosaur, but something finer, feathered, bird-like, probably early avian. Its body is gone scavenged or decomposed, but the wing still folded as if mid-rest. The feathers are etched in stunning clarity down to the central shaft and veins. You stare at it silent. Birds today don't think about rivers like this. They fly over, maybe stop to drink. But this ancestor, it probably thought it was safe too. Historians still puzzle over how such delicate impressions survived here. Some point to microbial mats, slimy layers of algae and bacteria that coated bodies, shielding them from decay and scavengers. Others argue it's the river's unique mineral cocktail, calcium carbonate, iron oxide, maybe even trace metals that accelerated fossilization. One theory. The river was slightly anoxic in its deeper pools, oxygen-starved, so nothing could rot properly. That's right, you're standing in a prehistoric stink swamp. Congratulations. You chuckle to yourself. Because of course, the secret to perfect preservation is bad vibes and worse smells. Nature is nothing if not ironic. You look down again at the fossilized wing. It's barely the size of your hand. A whisper from the past. You can almost feel the beat of air it might have stirred. The sun is lower now. The wind kicks up a tiny dust devil near the ridge. You keep walking, but slower, more careful. Because now you understand something: the river wasn't just water. It was a net. A trap disguised as a trail. A final resting place that tricked a million creatures into writing their names in stone. You stop at the top of a low rise, just above where the river once forked into a series of shallow, gleaming pools. Or at least that's what it looked like. From up here you can picture it clearly: wide, sun-dappled basins reflecting blue sky speckled with reeds, dragonflies skimming low. A perfect prehistoric watering hole. And that's the problem. The thing about these places is they lie. The water isn't deep, the footing isn't stable, and once you're in, the river decides if you're coming out again. This is where the biggest question starts to haunt you. Why did so many creatures die here while others, sometimes of the exact same species, seem to pass through unharmed? Historians still debate whether it came down to timing, weight instinct, or just dumb luck. Some animals got across with dry toes. Others sank chest deep in a heartbeat. You're staring now at the fossilized remains of a young hadrosaur sprawled on its side like it slipped. Its hind limbs are bunched like it was trying to push off. One forearm is half buried, twisted behind it. A bad fall, or maybe it hit a patch of slime and never recovered. Not far off, there's a trampled section of stone, dozens of overlapping tracks. This is what paleontologists call a convergence zone, a place where herds intersected, rested, or fled. You crouch and trace the shallow gouge of a clawed foot dragging sideways through the mud. Panic. It's frozen in place like a punctuation mark you weren't meant to notice. And here's the strange part, some creatures just walked through, like nothing happened. Giant sauropods weighing 40 tons left behind tracks that stroll casually across the same flats that swallowed smaller dinosaurs whole. How does that make sense? Well, here's the odd fact: weight doesn't always equal pressure. A huge animal with wide padded feet might exert less force per square inch than a panicked raptor leaping in tight bounds. Like wearing snowshoes across fresh powder, except the powder is silt and the stakes are your fossilized future. You follow one of those sauropod trackways now. The impressions are deep but regular. No stumbling, no hesitation, just a quiet, confident march. It's unsettling, really. You know that thing had a brain the size of a potato and yet it outsmarted a death trap. Meanwhile, a smarter predator with sharper teeth and better eyesight, it ends up face first in the mud 30 yards away. There's one right here, likely a dromaeosaurid. You can still see its teeth gritted into what must have been a final snarl. And the tail's stiff straight, those feathers are still faintly visible in the stone. This was not an instant death. This was struggle, sinking, fighting to pull free. Then silence. You glance at your own boots, double-check the stability beneath you. That same mud, now petrified, once behaved like a monster with patience. You shiver even though the heat still hangs heavy. The fossil record here doesn't lie, but it's confusing. Why would one entire species vanish in clusters right here while its close cousins are nowhere to be found? Historians think maybe different groups migrated differently, or certain social behaviors led some herds into more vulnerable positions. Maybe one group followed a sick leader. Maybe a predator's chase stampeded them the wrong way. There's an academic tug-of-war between those who argue for chaos and those who insist there was a pattern. But the river doesn't tell you that. It only shows you the end result, like a grim scrapbook with no captions. You move downhill again, closer to a depression where the mud once pooled deepest. Here's where it really hit the fan: dozens, maybe hundreds of overlapping bones, all tangled like driftwood after a storm. Ribs, jaws, beaks, hooves, claws, all turned the same color by the minerals that soaked them for eons. Some skeletons are pristine, jointed, and orderly. Others are exploded like confetti, the aftermath of trampling or scavenging. It's a mess, a beautiful, tragic mess, and not everything here is from the same time. That's the kicker. The river didn't trap a million fossils all at once. It did it over tens of thousands of years, like a collector adding to a morbid stamp book, one broken thing at a time. You see it in the subtle shifts. The color of the sediment changes slightly, the orientation of the fossils, the angle of the collapse. It's layered misfortune, a timeline written in bones. And just to really throw you off, occasionally there's a complete absence, a stretch of river where nothing died, no tracks, no skeletons, just silence. Was it safer then? Drier. Did animals learn to avoid it for a generation or two? Nobody knows. You pause beside a fossilized log cracked lengthwise like it exploded from drying out. On it, deep gouges, not from erosion, but from claws. Something tried to pull itself up and failed. You can picture it now, panic in its eye's tail thrashing the soft gulp of mud, dragging it down. Here's the final irony of the day. The river wasn't evil. It didn't hunt. It didn't choose. It simply was a phenomenon that rewarded caution and punished bad timing. And yet it became one of history's most prolific killers, not by action but by invitation. The pools shimmered. The ground looked solid. The path seemed safe. And so they came. Again and again. So did you. And you're not sure as the sun dips lower and your shadow stretches over yet another fossilized tragedy, whether you've outsmarted the river or it's just letting you go. The mud remembers. You step lightly now, not just from caution but respect, because everywhere you look, the river has preserved the kind of details that shouldn't survive millions of years. Not just skeletons, but mistakes, decisions, footsteps that ended too soon. You're standing in a section where the ground turns from dull gray to a smoother, almost glossy surface. It shines under the low sun like old lacquer, and there etched across it like a stuttering sentence are footprints. Dozens of them. Each one pressed so clearly into the hardened mudstone that you can see claw ridges and toe pads. This is what paleontologists call a trackway, but to you, it's choreography. The last few seconds of life for something that realized too late that the river had changed. You follow the prints three-toed bird-like, maybe a juvenile theropod. They start in a confident, even pace. Then abruptly, they stagger. One foot skids sideways. The other digs in deeper than the rest. And then nothing. No final print. No recovery. Just a smooth smear where the body must have collapsed and vanished. One moment it was walking. The next it was history. Odd fact. Fossilized footprints can tell scientists not just who walked there, but how fast and what direction, and even whether they were limping. They've reconstructed entire chase scenes from these ancient marks like forensic experts on a crime scene, which frankly is exactly what this is. Some tracks are shallow, like the creature was dancing across a firm crust. Others go deep panic steps, maybe. It's all here. Misjudged leaps, twists in the mud. One animal tried to turn around, but its back leg didn't follow. You can tell because the hip joint broke mid-motion. It fossilized like that. It takes a minute for it to hit you. You're walking across a battlefield with no survivors. Historians still debate whether these trackways belong to isolated travelers or entire migrations. Some argue the larger prints suggest herds, family groups moving in waves. Others think they were scattered, driven by drought or predator pressure. But either way, the evidence suggests one thing clearly: these creatures didn't come here expecting to die. You stop beside a set of particularly odd marks. They're rounder than the rest, more spread out. A large herbivore, maybe an ankylosaur. It looks like it moved cautiously, each footfall measured. But halfway across the trackway, the stride shortens dramatically. The angle of the prints narrows. It was sinking. Slowly. Sinking and turning its body sideways in one final desperate attempt to escape. It didn't. Just ahead, there's the imprint of its belly and nothing else. The rest of the skeleton must still be buried deeper down, trapped in layers yet to be excavated. Here's the haunting part: many of these tracks are interrupted. That is, they start and then they vanish, mid-stride. Like someone hit pause on reality, and often there are no signs of struggle. No thrashing, no bones. Just a soft depression in the earth where weight used to be. These are ghosts, you think. Not just of animals, but of choices. Of instincts that betrayed them, of paths taken that should have worked but didn't. You move to the edge of the flat and find something even stranger: a double set of tracks side by side. One set is small, the other is larger, heavier, possibly a parent and juvenile. You follow them for several yards. They weave, slightly stay close. Then suddenly the smaller set veers off. 3 steps, a skid, a collapse. The larger set hesitates, one foot planted, then another. But it doesn't follow. It stops, lingers, and then moves on. There's no fossil there, just prints. But you feel it. That moment, that pause, that impossible decision to keep going. You breathe slowly, carefully, because it feels like any loud sound might erase it. This river didn't just preserve bones, it captured hesitation. Loyalty, abandonment. All the things we like to think make us human turned to stone long before humans existed. Odd fact number 2 for the night. Some dinosaur trackways have been found with drag marks beside them. Not from tails, but from wings. That's right, early birds are gliders flapping just enough to help with balance as they dashed across dangerous terrain. Think of it as the prehistoric version of hovering nervously. One such set of tracks is here. Tiny prints maybe 3 inches long with a wavering line between them. You imagine the creature was fluttering low to the ground, unsure whether to fly or run. It did both. Neither worked. Historians still argue whether these river crossers knew the risks. Were they repeat visitors? Did some generations remember? Was there a time of year when the mud dried just enough to make crossing survivable, or was every step a gamble? You look around now. The wind's died again. The landscape's gone back to stillness, to silence. And it occurs to you most of what we know about this world comes from footprints. More than bones, more than teeth. Just impressions, temporary contacts between living flesh and soft ground made permanent by the strangest combination of moisture and minerals. And somehow, they've lasted longer than mountains. You take one more look at the interrupted tracks, and for a moment, you forget you're walking through fossils. It just feels like walking through grief. The river didn't kill all at once. It killed in steps. You smell water, but it's a trick. That's what they must have thought too, the ones with heavy legs and thirsty mouths. Herds that wandered for days across cracked plains and shimmering heat mirages, finally arriving at what looked like salvation, a stretch of water glinting in the sun fringed with reeds, maybe even a croak of frogs or the buzzing of insects. But the river didn't welcome them. It waited. You're kneeling beside what was once a watering hole. The shape of it is still visible, a shallow basin where the silt dips and darkens. It would have been a natural congregation point, a place of relief. But that's the bait. What came next was the trap. You spot the outline of another fallen giant, a ceratopsian, likely Triceratops, or one of its cousins. It's collapsed in a way that tells a full story. Front legs outstretched, rear twisted, the horned skull sunk almost nose-deep into what was once sludge. It probably tried to drink. The edges of the fossil show cracks where the mud dried around it, tightening like a fist. The sad truth. Many of the animals that died here didn't come to hunt or migrate. They came to survive. They came because they were desperate. This river had a cruel rhythm. In the wet season, it spread into shallow wetlands, muddy but manageable. In the dry season, it shrank into a chain of isolated pools. Those pools became lifelines for everything within 100 miles, and the more animals gathered, the more dangerous it became. Odd fact, even today in parts of Africa, desperate droughts turn waterholes into natural traps. The first to arrive survive. The last they get bogged down, trampled, or left behind. Nature doesn't play fair, it plays consistently. Historians still debate whether these drying pools in the ancient river were seasonal or part of a larger climate collapse. Some theories point to volcanic winter's sudden cold snaps that dried the interior. Others suggest a slow desertification. But whatever the cause, the effect was the same. The river turned into a promise that couldn't be kept. You wander to a spot where scavenger trails crisscross the ground. These aren't fossilized animals, but trackways. Dozens of them overlapping like a frantic game of tag. Small theropods, maybe troodontids or early raptors, opportunists. You picture them circling the dying herbivores, waiting for just enough stillness to start nibbling. Some got too close. You find one here, a predator caught mid-feed. Its skull is crushed. Its rib cage collapsed like a broken umbrella. Whether it slipped, sank, or was kicked by its intended meal, you'll never know. But its claws are still hooked around a bone that didn't belong to it. This is the trap within the trap. The river didn't just kill the thirsty, it killed the hungry too. Each death invited another. Each fallen body became bait for the next mistake. It wasn't chaos, it was economy. You come across another pool-shaped depression, smaller, ringed with old root casts where trees once stood. It would have been shady, sheltered. A favorite stop for smaller animals. The fossilized remains here are more delicate early mammals, birds and lizards. They lie tangled in what looks like a rush to drink. Some are nose to surface, others twisted as if startled mid-sip. You try to imagine the sounds, squeaks, chirps, maybe cautious footfalls on the muddy banks. Then a crack, a groan of shifting ground, and suddenly nothing but sinking. Here's a weird one for the trivia bank. There's fossil evidence of insect swarms embedded in the mud nearby. Entire clouds of ancient bugs, their delicate wings and legs perfectly preserved. Some scientists think they were drawn by decay, scavenging midges and flies feasting on rotting bodies, only to get caught themselves in the same fatal goo. Nature doesn't hand out immunity cards. You follow the slope down to what must have been the deepest point in the channel. It's darker here, the rocks stained with iron and manganese. Everything rusted by time. Bones lie jumbled in heaps, crocodilians, turtles, even fish. You'd think the fish had it easy, but nope. As the pools shrank, oxygen vanished. Whole schools died in place, their gills clogged by silt, their bodies fossilized mid-swim. Historians argue about just how many deaths it took to create this bone field. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The estimates climb with every dig season. What's certain is that the cycle kept repeating: drought, thirst, crowd, collapse. Every century a new cast. Same script. And what's chilling is how many animals must have escaped too. The ones we'll never find because they made it back to solid ground or died somewhere unremarkable. The fossil record doesn't capture survivors, it remembers the unlucky. You step carefully between two partial skeletons, one predator, one prey, both entangled. You wonder if it was a chase, or if they both came here separately and died the same way. The river doesn't care, it just adds them to the pile. Above you, the sun burns lower, flattening the light into long shadows. A breeze picks up stirring dust across the fossil plain. For a moment it feels like the past isn't gone. It's just lying beneath a thin crust of silence waiting to be noticed. You stand brushing your hands on your pants and glance back at the fallen ceratopsian. It still looks like it's drinking, still reaching, still believing the lie. This river was never about speed or force, it was about illusion. And now you know why so many ended up here, not because they were weak or foolish, but because they wanted to live. And that hope, that's what got them. You move toward a patch of ground that looks at first glance disappointingly smooth. No obvious skeletons, no dramatic trackways, no scattered claws. Just a gentle slope of dust and fine stone crusted over like the surface of a dried pond. And then you see it a shimmer. Not water, not metal, but something between. You kneel brushing the surface with your fingers, and there it is, a skin impression. Yes, skin. You can see the bumps, tiny scales like pebbled leather. They're arranged in neat patterns, each one barely wider than a grain of rice. You stare at it a little stunned, because this shouldn't be here. The river wasn't supposed to keep this much detail. Bones? Sure, teeth often. But skin, feathers, tissues that should have rotted away in days, that take some very weird luck and even weirder chemistry. And yet, in this cursed corner of time, the river did exactly that. This section of the riverbed holds what scientists call soft tissue windows. Rare fossil zones where conditions were so exact, so freakishly perfect, that even the most fragile details were preserved. Here, flesh didn't rot. It flattened, pressed between mineral-laden mud and a slow, steady pressure that turned biology into sculpture. You move a little farther and find another, this one unmistakable. A full-body imprint, something about the size of a turkey, maybe an early bird or feathered raptor. Its head is gone, but the wings are folded, and the faint outline of its tail fans behind it like a ghost. And the feathers, they're still there? Not the feathers themselves, of course, those decayed long ago. but the impressions they left are pristine. You can even make out the central quill and the finer barbs. They ripple backward as if caught mid-flutter. Odd fact. Some of these feathers preserve not just structure, but color. Scientists have found melanosomes, microscopic pigment sacs that suggest what shades these creatures might have been. In one case, a small dinosaur likely had iridescent crow-like feathers. Not dull, not dusty, shiny. Historians still debate whether feathers evolved first for warmth, for flight, or for show. Some think they were display tools, bright warning flags, or mating signals. Others argue they began as insulation like a feathered hoodie. But here in this riverbed function doesn't matter. Only that they were here. And that they stayed. You stop to think about what else might be hidden beneath this stone. Maybe a full-winged predator folded in on itself like a broken kite. Maybe a baby dinosaur, the shape of its eyelids still visible. One sight like this, just one, has the power to rewrite everything we think we know. You kneel again, tracing a strange splotch in the mudstone. It looks like nothing at first. Then you realize it's a patch of skin with hair. Not fur exactly, but proto-hair. Fibrous strands. Likely from a mammalian ancestor. It's curled slightly like it dried mid-shrink. That shouldn't have survived. And yet here it is. This section of the river must have been unusually rich in minerals, especially silicates and carbonates, which helped seal organisms before bacteria had a chance to devour them. Some scientists believe microbial mats played a role here too, forming slimy barriers that slowed decay. Others point to the fine grain of the sediment mud so dense that it kept oxygen out, like a prehistoric vacuum pack. It's a perfect storm of chemistry, timing, and geology. One misplaced gust of wind 70 million years ago and none of this would be here. You pause, then lift your gaze to the horizon. The ground undulates, slightly low ripples where the river once twisted back on itself. Somewhere out there are more of these impressions, more feathers, more skin, maybe even something rarer. Fossilized stomach contents have been found in this area. Real meals caught mid-digestion. In one case, the skeleton of a small dinosaur had the bones of a lizard in its gut perfectly aligned. Another fish, scales in the belly of a semi-aquatic predator. It's one thing to know what a creature looked like. It's another to know what it ate for lunch. That's the level of detail this river gave us. And it's not polite, it's intimate. The earth here doesn't just preserve what lived. It preserves how it lived, and how it died. There's a kind of hush now. The winds died down. The lights turned amber. You're standing amid millions of years of secrets, and it feels like they're still breathing. You half expect to hear a chirp, a flap of wings, a splash. Instead, it's just you and the dust, and the slow ticking of deep time. You brush one last patch of stone and find something delicate. Not bone, not skin, but something fibrous, a plant. A fossilized fern, its fronds still arched. It must have grown on the riverbank, probably fed herbivores. Probably died in the same flood. Nothing here escaped the river's grip. The preservation is so rich, so bizarrely complete, that it's changed how paleontologists work. This isn't just excavation, it's surgery. Every brushstroke, every layer removed reveals new details. Sometimes what looks like rock is actually skin. What looks like a stain is actually a heartbeat captured in color. Historians still debate whether this site is the result of sheer coincidence or something more unique, a one-time convergence of volcanic activity, sediment type, and climate stress. Whatever the cause, it turned the river from a burial site into a time capsule. And as you rise brushing stone from your hands, you realize something strange. You're not just standing in a fossil bed, you're standing in a moment. You start to notice a pattern not just in what died here, but in what came after. Every skeleton, every twisted body, every collapsed trackway has company. Not a herdmate, not a rival. but something else drawn to the scene. Something with sharp teeth, light steps, and worse luck. The scavenger's trap within the trap. It's one thing to die of thirst, or exhaustion, or bad footing. But imagine coming here for a free meal, seeing the bloated corpse of a fallen herbivore, just waiting to be stripped and then sinking right alongside it. That's the kind of insult only nature can deliver with a straight face. You crouch beside a jumbled tangle of bones, a medium-sized theropod, maybe a juvenile tyrannosaur or a larger dromaeosaur. Its snout is buried in the rib cage of another creature, an ornithopod long dead before the scavenger arrived. The predator's legs are twisted, tail-arched claws still latched in a grip that clearly didn't help. It came here to eat. It stayed to become dinner. Historians still debate how much of this site's fossil diversity came from predation versus scavenging. You'd think it would be obvious teeth marks claw scores, but decay doesn't always tell you who chewed it. Some researchers say the bite patterns suggest a desperate ecosystem. Others argue the bodies here were so well preserved scavengers barely had time to feast before they too got stuck. You move along the edge of a dry, cracked channel where a series of skeletons lie overlapping like discarded clothes. The layering's thin here, not built up over centuries, more like a few violent weeks. It suggests a drought, a really bad one. And then relief. Brief rain, enough to make mud. Enough to catch anything with hunger or guts. Odd fact in several predator fossils from this river. The bones show healed injuries. Broken ribs, snapped claws, even healed bite marks. That means they lived hard, fought often, maybe even fought each other, and still ended up here chasing easy prey into their own graves. You see it in the fossil skulls embedded face-first, jaws agape, ribs arched like they were trying to pull back at the last second. Even tooth fragments broken mid-bite left embedded in victims who may not have been dead yet. And here's the darkly comic part. The more bodies the river claimed, the more appealing it looked. To the living, to the desperate. Picture a circle of death that draws more and more participants, not because they're fooled, but because they think they're smarter than the last ones. You find one example a little farther along a predator that actually made it onto a carcass. You can tell because the skeleton is curled into a feeding position and the skull is full of shattered bone fragments from its last meal. But its legs are missing. Not scavenged, just not fossilized. Probably sunk first. The rest followed. This place was a buffet with a price tag. And every bite cost more than it was worth. You spot something smaller. Now, an ancient crocodilian partially embedded in the side of the river channel. Its teeth are exposed, one eye socket caved in. Likely ambushed something too big for it. Maybe it dragged a limb down. Maybe it got dragged down instead. Predators don't think about escape routes when food is on the line. Even insects join the feast. In some sediment layers, paleontologists found fossilized beetle burrows inside rib cages. Larvae that hatched inside corpses dug little holes, then fossilized along with their playgrounds. Nature really does commit to the bit. There's also evidence of microbial mats, thin films of bacteria and algae that coated the bodies before full decay set in. Some scientists believe these mats actually helped preserve the corpses, acting like saran wrap over the meat, staving off rot until burial. And while that sounds useful from a scientific perspective, you can't help but picture a dino-shaped burrito wrapped in slime. Historians still question how scavenger species interacted here. Did they operate in hierarchies? Did larger predators displace smaller ones? Or was it chaos? Everyone biting everyone until they all slipped under together. There are signs of both. Some skeletons show clean separation, kill, feed, leave. Others are a mess, crushed bones, overstepped bodies, collapsed, fight scenes that never finished. This river wasn't just a trap, it was a stage. And every time the curtain rose, the actors changed. The herbivores stumbled in first. The scavengers arrived later, noses in the wind. And finally, maybe days or weeks later, came the last performers, the ones who hovered at the edges, sniffed the air, weighed their odds, and lost. You pause at a ridge where the sun casts everything in gold. Below you, fossilized remains lie like an unmade bed, sprawled, bent, tangled. Each body part its own clue. A claw hooked around a femur, a jaw resting on a tail. It's not tidy. This was never tidy. The scavengers here weren't just unlucky. They were part of the system. The more they fed, the more the river had to offer. The more it offered, the more came to feed. It wasn't a cycle. It was a spiral. And like all spirals, it went down. You kick a loose stone and watch it skitter over a weathered spine. You whisper an apology, not because it can hear you, but because this place demands a little reverence. The river didn't kill just the weak. It killed the bold, the greedy, the clever, the opportunistic. And it buried them all the same. The dinosaurs are long gone by now. You wouldn't know it at first. The bones still lie thick in the dust skulls, grinning claws frozen mid-swipe. But when you check the sediment layers, you realize you've stepped into another time entirely. New bones, new beasts, a new chapter in the river's grim scrapbook. You kneel beside a curved ivory shape, half buried in chalky silt. It's a tusk, worn smooth at the tip, broken near the root. Nearby lies its owner, a mastodon or maybe a mammoth, depending on who you ask. Paleontologists are still arguing over the exact species. But one thing's clear, this creature died much, much later. The river had changed. The plants were different. The air colder. But the trap? Still open for business. You're in the Pleistocene now, the Ice Age. The age of giants wrapped in fur. And they didn't fare much better than the ones with feathers. Odd fact. Some of the best preserved Ice Age fossils in this region include soft tissue chunks of preserved hide, even traces of gut bacteria. Scientists once pulled undigested grass from between the teeth of a mummified bison, not fossilized, just mummified. As if it died last winter, not 20,000 years ago. The river didn't even need to work hard anymore. Climate did most of the damage. Animals like saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, and early horses wandered down for water as glaciers pulled back and seasonal rains failed. Then, same routine, slippery banks, bad footing, still ponds that turned to quicksand in the blink of a cold snap. You spot the remains of a large herbivore nearby, likely a ground sloth. Its claws are enormous, curled like scimitars. Its belly-down front legs sprawled a fossil that looks suspiciously like someone doing a push-up and failing miserably. Behind it, a cluster of bones that belonged to a dire wolf. Maybe a packmate. Maybe a rival. Maybe the one that made the fatal tackle. The tension between predator and prey didn't vanish with the meteor. It just got colder. Historians still debate how long the river stayed active as a trap into the Ice Age. Some argue it dried out entirely at certain points, turning into a dusty graveyard rather than an active killer. Others suggest that intermittent flooding brought just enough moisture to lure mammalian megafauna into a false sense of security. Whatever the truth, the evidence is stacked in layered misery. You can trace the downfall of entire species in just a few inches of rock. The end of camels, the fate of North American lions. A scattering of human artifacts, yes, human among animal remains. That's right, people came here too. You notice it now, a stone blade. Not a perfect spear point, just a flake with one edge carefully sharpened. It lies near a broken bone with suspicious cut marks. Someone stood here once, someone with calloused hands, a clever mind, and a need to eat. And maybe a little too much confidence in their footing. The humans were latecomers to the river's curse. They hunted smarter, learned faster. But even they weren't immune. You find evidence of fire pits, cracked marrow bones, even charcoal embedded in clay. Campfires built dangerously close to the edges. Maybe they thought they'd tamed the land. They didn't. One layer in particular, a dense floodplain sediment, holds the remains of both a young bison and a human child. No weapons, no cut marks, just bones lying almost side by side. Historians still argue about that one. A tragic accident, a predator attack? Or maybe just one of those moments where fate shrugged and took two lives instead of one. No one knows. But the silence in that layer is louder than anything else you've seen so far. And through all of this, the mammoths, the wolves, the sloths, the hunters, the river stayed the same. Not in shape, not in speed, but in spirit. It remained a magnet for life and death. You take a few careful steps toward a dried gully lined with petrified roots. The path is lined with smaller fossils now, rabbits, birds, even frogs. The kind of things that never get museum exhibits. But they mattered too. They fed the big things, warned of floods, dug tunnels that changed the soil. Their footprints are etched just as delicately as those of the giants. Oddly enough, some of the last fossils preserved here show signs of stress bone deformities, nutrient deficiencies, signs of a world unraveling. Maybe the climate changed too fast, maybe the food ran out, maybe it was all of the above. You pause beside a set of overlapping tracks, human and animal crisscrossing in both directions. Some may have been hunters, others simply walking the same trail. You imagine the people who came here scanning for prey napping stones, telling stories around the fire completely unaware that they were walking over millions of years of death. The weight of it hits you. The dinosaurs were drawn by thirst, the scavengers by opportunity, the mammals by migration, and the humans. Maybe they came for answers. They didn't find them, and neither will you. Because the river isn't interested in giving answers, only patterns. The trap still whispers even now. It's quiet, buried dry. But if you stand here long enough, you start to feel it, the hum beneath your boots, the distant echo of water where no water runs. You shake it off, it's nothing. Just wind. Or the past. Watching. It's not just bones, it's puzzles. You kneel beside what looks like the world's worst jigsaw, a jumbled mass of fossilized limbs, ribs, vertebrae, all from different species, different times, and different conditions. Some are pristine, some are splintered, a few are barely recognizable, and somehow scientists take all this and start telling stories. You wonder how. You wonder who looked at a pile of rocks that used to be a leg and said, "Oh yes, clearly this was a predator that injured its foot 3 weeks before starving in a drought." But that's what they do. They read the bones like crime scene reports. Because every fossil here is a confession. You move to the edge of a small excavation pit, shallow but clean still, ringed with stakes and string. The remains inside belong to a juvenile hadrosaur. Most of the skeleton is articulated, meaning the bones are still in place. But the spine twists oddly at the midsection. Nearby is a healed fracture in one of the ribs. Paleontologists think it fell and survived. For a while. Then came the river. Odd fact, modern technology allows us to examine fossils in ways no shovel ever could. CT scans, isotope analysis, even synchrotron imaging. Yes, that's a real thing. Let scientists peer inside the fossils without damaging them. They can tell what an animal ate, how fast it grew, even how much stress it carried in its joints. Historians still debate how reliable some of these tools are, especially isotope readings from this particular site. The river's complex chemistry sometimes scrambles the data, like trying to read a letter that's been soaked in tea. But the patterns still emerge when something lived, when it moved, when it died. And some of those patterns are haunting. You come across a partial skull with its eye socket perfectly preserved. But here's the strange part. One side shows signs of intense wear, while the other is almost untouched. A right-side predator maybe, or an injury that changed its behavior. These are the things scientists fight over in dusty tents with bad coffee and too much sun. You pass a table where fragments are laid out like clues at a detective's briefing. A tooth, a phalanx, a sliver of horn. All tagged, all cataloged, all part of a mystery that may never fully resolve. Because this river didn't just trap animals, it scattered them. Weather, floods, scavengers all tore the puzzle apart before we ever arrived to try and put it back together. Here's something you probably didn't expect: fossilized burrows. Yes, tunnels. Dug into soft mud by prehistoric mammals or reptiles seeking shelter, then abandoned and filled with silt. In some cases, the animals themselves died inside them. Whole families, preserved like time capsules. You pass one now, a corkscrew-shaped spiral descending into the rock. At the bottom, the curled skeleton of something rodent-sized, its tiny paws tucked under its chin. Not every death here was dramatic. Some were just quiet. Nearby, you find a slab of stone covered in tiny ovals eggs. Cracked, shattered, but recognizable. A nest or what's left of one. Maybe it was buried in a flood. Maybe it was trampled. Maybe it never hatched. You'll never know. The puzzles aren't always big. Sometimes it's the things missing that raise eyebrows. A trackway that stops short but no body. A skeleton with no skull. A footprint with no matching species anywhere nearby. Some scientists suggest that scavengers drag pieces away. Others think whole carcasses floated downstream and only bits fossilized. And sometimes, it's just luck. Bad or good, depending on your angle. You stand now over one of the strangest puzzles of the site, a mass grave of fish all pointing the same direction. At first glance, it looks like they were swept together in a current, but there's no ripple marks, no flow indicators. Just a weirdly uniform death spiral, as if something paralyzed them mid-swim. Historians argue whether it was a gas release, a sudden drop in temperature, or some unknown poison. No one agrees, but it's there. A mystery staring back with vacant fossil eyes. You head toward a larger dig site where the outlines of a massive predator skeleton are being carefully uncovered. Only half is visible. The other half curves down into a deeper layer. It'll take months to get it all out. A junior researcher nearby is brushing gently at the fossil's snout, barely touching it. This part has to be done by hand. Every movement deliberate. Every second, a calculation. Because here at the river's edge, the wrong breath might erase 10,000 years. This isn't just science, it's obsession. You find a notebook left on a nearby rock, pages fluttering in the breeze. Scribbled sketches, measurements, a drawing of a claw next to a can of soda for scale. Paleontology is strange, like that half data, half doodle, but always awe. The deeper the fossils, the more abstract they get. Bone becomes mineral, texture becomes mystery. Sometimes you don't even know what you're holding. Is it a rib, a plant stem? A chunk of fossilized cartilage that shouldn't even exist? The river doesn't explain, it just delivers, and then leaves us to figure it out one splinter at a time. You look up, dust on your hands. Questions in your head. You came here thinking you'd see bones. You didn't expect to see riddles. And the worst part, some of them don't want to be solved. You're beginning to understand something. This isn't just a fossil site, it's a conversation. A long, broken, whispery conversation where half the words are missing and the other half are carved into stone. But they're still speaking to anyone patient enough to listen. You're back at the surface now, walking past crates filled with plaster jackets and fragments tagged with strings and codes. Everything's labeled like evidence in a slow-motion crime drama. But this isn't just about what happened. It's about how we know what happened. Because bones alone can only take you so far. Now comes the weird part, the science after the dig. You stop at a workstation covered in gear that looks more like it belongs in a hospital than a fossil lab. CT scanners, microdrills, microscopes, even isotope analysis kits. These aren't used to dig, they're used to decode, to look inside bones without breaking them, to see what's hidden beneath what's hidden. One fossil here, just a shin bone, was scanned to reveal the density of the marrow cavity. From that, scientists inferred the dinosaur's weight, health, and even age. They could tell it was still growing, that it was likely under stress, and that it probably didn't make it through the dry season. Another bone, just a cracked rib, held traces of microscopic fractures. Repeated, consistent, evidence of a life spent running, fleeing, or maybe just walking too far too often. Historians still debate what causes those stress lines: climate, predators, poor nutrition, but they all agree it means life here wasn't easy. Odd fact, some fossilized teeth from this riverbed still contain intact enamel proteins. We're talking actual chemical traces, not just shape and color. Scientists are using those proteins to compare species, and in some cases to track evolutionary lines we didn't even know existed. That's where paleo art comes in. You see sketches everywhere, some pinned to corkboards, others scrawled on the backs of field notes. There's a kind of reverence to it, the way artists try to breathe flesh back into fossils using only fragments. A feather here, a muscle scar there. It's not guessing. It's deduction with a dash of imagination. You pause in front of a rendering of a young theropod feathers fluffed mid-sprint across a muddy flat. It's based entirely on one trackway and a partial femur, but you feel like you know it, like it's alive again. One of the researchers here tells you how they use 3D modeling to reconstruct entire skeletons even when only 40% of the bones are found. Scans, symmetry. Comparisons. It's all digital now. You can rotate a fossil on screen, see the wear patterns, measure the strain on joints, even simulate movement. Historians still argue whether those simulations are accurate. Some think we've gone too far relying on pixels instead of dirt. Others say it's the only way forward. After all, you can't rebury a fossil. Once it's out, it's information or it's lost. And it gets weirder. Recently, researchers began applying forensic ballistics techniques. Yes, like crime scene CSI to fossil wounds. They run pressure simulations, analyze entry angles, even calculate bite force to figure out who did the biting. One paper claimed to identify the species of the attacker based on the spacing of 2 puncture marks in a rib. You chuckle. Because yes, we're using murder mystery tools on animals that died 70 million years ago. And it's working. Even more recently, isotope analysis has started to reveal something even stranger: migration. By measuring trace elements in tooth enamel, scientists can figure out where an animal lived during different parts of its life. Kind of like reading tree rings, but with chemistry. And some results from this riverbed shocking. One hadrosaur specimen shows a lifetime of travel, born hundreds of miles away, grew up near a volcano, died here. Another shows repeated seasonal returns to this very spot. Maybe it remembered the water. Maybe it forgot the danger. Maybe memory doesn't work the way we think. You notice a new CT scan being displayed on a nearby screen. It's a bird-like dinosaur skull with one eye socket oddly enlarged. A birth defect, probably. But it raises questions. Did it affect depth perception? Did it make the animal more vulnerable? Did it die sooner because of it? The answer, maybe. But the real story is this: the fossil lived. It grew. It adapted. It mattered. That's the strange thing about this whole site. You arrive expecting tragedy, mass. Death-silent graves, layers of sorrow, and yes, it's all that. But what you find when you stay long enough is life. Glorious, stupid, complicated, resilient life. Every bone is proof that something tried. The river kept its secrets for millions of years, buried under wind and ash. And now, piece by piece, scan by scan, brushstroke by brushstroke, we're dragging those secrets back into the light. But they don't come easy. Sometimes a fossil crumbles. Sometimes the data doesn't make sense. Sometimes a theory gets overturned by a single misplaced tooth. The science is never settled. It just hums forward like the river once did, slow winding, full of unexpected turns. You take one last look at the workstation, at the tools and monitors and wires snaking across the floor. It's not glamorous, it's not loud, but it's where the real work happens. In silence, in doubt, in small, careful gestures. Bones can tell you how a creature died, but it takes science to tell you how it lived. You climb the rise just beyond the excavation grid where the landscape smooths out and the fossils thin. It's quieter here. Less science, more story. Because this is where the river blurs from data into folklore, from catalog into curse. You stop near a line of stones placed deliberately in a crescent. They're not part of any excavation. No stakes, no plastic flags, just old rocks marked with charcoal symbols long since faded by wind and rain. Not paleontology, something older. This is where the ghosts live. For generations, the local communities, indigenous groups, ranchers, even early settlers spoke of this place in half-whispers. Not because they didn't know what it was, but because they did. They knew it was dangerous. Not just in the physical sense, but in that old ancestral way. The kind of danger that eats your name when you speak it out loud. Odd fact. Before modern digs even started, people reported strange things around this site, missing cattle tools that vanished and reappeared, and sounds, deep, gurgling sounds coming from the earth on still nights. And before that, the indigenous tribes had a name for this place. Several, actually. The translations vary. The bones that wait. The hollow river, the place where footsteps fade. They all suggest the same truth. This wasn't just a place where things died. It was a place that kept them. Historians still debate the extent to which indigenous oral histories align with the geological record. Some say it's coincidence. Others believe those stories preserved knowledge long before the first fossil brush touched soil. After all, it was tribal guides who led the first paleontologists here in the early 1900s. They already knew where the bones were. They just didn't feel the need to dig them up. You walk now beside a patch of earth pocked with old offerings. Bits of fabric tied to trees, worn beads, a rusted horseshoe half buried in the dust. People still come here not just to study but to ask for what you're not sure. But the river seems to listen. You remember one story a local elder told researchers decades ago of a boy who followed a dying deer into the ravine and never came back. His tracks ended mid-stride. No struggle, no sign, just gone. That's the detail that gets repeated, not the sadness, the vanishing. There's another story, less whispered and more laughed at, about a fossil that rearranged itself. A pelvis that showed up 20 feet from where it was originally logged. The researcher blamed wind. Others blamed bad notes. But someone else quietly locked the site for a week and brought in a shaman instead of a geologist. You laugh because it's silly, until it isn't. Because even now with GPS grids and satellite maps, things shift. Fossils vanish and turn up later. Field tools go missing and are found placed neatly on camp tables no one was near. Once, a perfectly unbroken trilobite fossil from an entirely different formation appeared in a dig tent overnight. Everyone blamed a prank. No one admitted to it. The deeper you dig into the earth here, the more you dig into something else, an unease. The sense that maybe the river didn't just trap bones. Maybe it trapped time. Maybe it blurred the line between what happened and what could still happen. Historians still argue whether these stories matter. If folklore has a place in science, if dreams and dread should be footnoted. But some of the best researchers you'll ever meet still pour a drop of water on the dirt before they start work. Just in case. Call it respect. Call it insurance. You reach the edge of a bluff where a recent landslide peeled back a layer of sediment like the page of a book. Half a skull juts out, not yet logged, not yet moved. You notice it's facing uphill. Strange. Most fossils here lie in positions of collapse or drift, but this one, it looks like it was watching. Maybe that's just the paranoia talking. The wind does that out here, whispers where it shouldn't, moves when nothing else does. The river is dry, but something about it feels unfinished. You walk back towards the staging area, eyes scanning the ground. A flash of white catches your eye. Not bone. A fragment of glass melted, warped. Probably from an old campfire. You pick it up, turn it over. It reflects the sky strangely, like it's remembering something. People have tried to close this place off before, build fences, post warnings. But the bones keep surfacing, the ground keeps shifting, and the river, though dry, still has gravity. Not in the physics sense, in the mythic sense. Because every fossil here started as a mistake. A footstep too far, a mouth too thirsty, a bite too greedy. And now the river waits for yours. It happened in one night, one flood, one breathless, shrieking, impossible moment. You stand at the base of a cliff where the river cut itself open. Not through erosion or gentle weathering, but through violence. The soil here is peeled back in layers, thick and slumping, like wet cake exposing bones that hadn't seen light in tens of thousands of years. It's the kind of exposure paleontologists dream about and dread in equal measure. Because the flood didn't just reveal the past, it threw it into chaos. The story goes like this: heavy rains came hard one spring, too fast, too much. The old riverbed, long dried and stable, couldn't handle it. Water tore through like a chainsaw through cardboard. Walls of sediment collapsed, hills split. Entire shelves of fossil-laden earth slid downward like melting frosting, and beneath them secrets. Odd fact, this flood revealed over 600 individual fossil specimens in just 1 month. That's not just rare, that's surreal. Some came out fully exposed skeletons, complete and smiling, like they were waiting for someone to look. Others were mid-break, caught in the act of fossilizing, as if the process had paused for dramatic effect. One skull, still half trapped in clay, had the roots of a modern tree growing through its eye socket. When the tree fell during the flood, it pulled the fossil with it. 2 lives, separated by eons, colliding in one muddy, soggy mess. Historians still argue about how much damage the flood did versus how much it revealed. Some say it was a tragedy, layers lost, sights disturbed, context shattered. Others say it was a miracle, a crack in time that let us see farther than we were supposed to. You walk through the aftermath now, boots crunching on pebbled debris. Around you lie crates, tarps, hastily labeled samples. Scientists are still sorting through it all. Some work frantically brushing dirt off bones. Others just stare dazed like they're watching a dream unravel. The river, long thought dormant, had spoken again, but not gently. A section of cliff nearby collapsed into the floodplain. Behind it, a nest. Eggs still arranged in a circle, some crushed, some perfectly preserved. The researchers who found it cried. And then they got to work. A little farther on, a mammoth femur juts from the soil like a diving board. At its base, stone tools. Not just flakes, but a hammerstone. That changes everything. It means humans were here then, not later. It means they may have seen some of these deaths, or maybe caused them. You can feel the tension in the air around the dig site like static clinging to dry clothes. Every discovery raises more questions than it answers. One researcher shows you a flattened skull with strange puncture wounds far too clean to be natural decay. They think it's a new predator species. No match yet, just an idea. A shape. A killer with no name. You glance down a slope of fresh mud and find a fossil lying face up. A turtle. Shell-cracked limbs outstretched. It's so well preserved it looks like it could blink, but it's been dead for 50,000 years or more. The river's flood didn't just wash away sediment, it washed away certainty. Historians still debate whether these events help or hurt. The loss of stratigraphic context is devastating. Fossils lose their place in the timeline. It becomes harder to prove who lived when, who followed whom, who hunted what. But sometimes the sheer quantity of data forces science to shift, forces theories to adapt. That's the flood's gift and curse overwhelming truth. The bones here aren't placed. They're thrown. Tangled. Uncomfortable. You find a juvenile theropod with its spine twisted almost 270 degrees death by drowning, likely its final moments locked in an underwater spiral. Nearby, a fully intact plant fossil petal still outlined in silt. Flowering species rarely fossilize well. Too soft, too brief, but here it is, delicate and defiant. And in between the fossils, bits of modern detritus, plastic ribbon, a lost notebook page, a crumpled snack wrapper. Evidence that we too leave things behind. We just haven't been buried yet. You pause beside a stone ledge, looking down at the scattered scene. It feels like the lid of time has been pried off, like you're seeing something not meant to be seen all at once. And that's the thing, paleontology is usually slow. Careful. Brush label catalog. But the flood didn't care about protocol. It pulled back the curtain all at once and shouted, "Here!" Not a whisper, a roar. You kneel, brush dust from your fingers. The bones here haven't finished speaking, not by a long shot, but they're louder now, closer, pressed up against the surface of time like hands on frosted glass. You can't look away. And somewhere beneath your feet, in a layer yet untouched, another million secrets wait. You stand still now just for a minute and let the silence settle. The air is thick with dust and sun, the kind of heat that hums behind your ears. Everything's quiet, no picks, no chatter, no distant radio crackle from the dig tents. Just the wind curling softly around the bones. You are standing where extinction stood before. It's not a metaphor, not a poetic flourish. You are quite literally on top of a mass grave where life blinked out in pieces. Slowly, repeatedly. Again and again, until the river was more bone than mud. And still it took more. You look around. The ground beneath your boots is cracked but steady. It hasn't rained in weeks, maybe months. But you know beneath the surface it's not solid. Not really. It's layers of failure. Of things that didn't make it. That stepped too far, drank too long, ran too late. You take a deep breath. There's no warning sign that says, "Here lies the end," but there should be, because this patch of land has seen more disappearances than any single battlefield, any burning city, any forgotten tomb. The river didn't kill in a blaze, it killed in nudges. A misstep here, a late migration there, a dry season a little too dry. And so the giants fell, one at a time, then in herds, then in history. Odd fact. The last mammoths to walk the earth didn't live in this riverbed, they lived on an island off the coast of Siberia. They died out only 4,000 years ago. That's after the pyramids, after writing. Almost within whispering distance of memory. We think extinction is dramatic. It usually isn't. It's slow, it's quiet, and then it's done. You look down, at your boots, at the dust. You imagine what it would be like to sink not fast but imperceptibly. 1 inch, then another. You wouldn't even notice at first. Just a little harder to lift your foot, a little more resistance, and then too late. Historians still debate whether the creatures who died here understood what was happening, whether there was panic, whether the survivors carried knowledge forward, told stories in calls or gestures or scent trails, or if every migration walked blind into the same mistake. We don't know. We never will. But the fossils, oh, they remember. You pass a ridge shaped like a bent spine. Not metaphorically, literally. A spine. Still embedded vertebrae worn smooth by time and touch. Around it, fossils of smaller animals, prey species. They died here too, but not all at once, in layers. It's like the land itself is sighing. You pause at a weathered post near the edge of the site. It's carved with initials. Not ancient, just a dig crew from the 70s. Their mark, their legacy. Everyone wants to be remembered. Even those who dig up the ones who never had a choice. You step past it out onto a flat shelf where the sediment glitters with mica and quartz. The light bends here, not like a special effect, more like an afterthought. A trick of dust and time. You're not sure if it's beautiful or unsettling. Probably both. It's strange you think how quiet extinction is, not just for the animals, but for us. Species disappear all the time. Amphibians, birds, insects. But there's no river to catch them, no perfect mud to fossilize their last steps. No bones laid out neatly like a warning. Just absence. That's the difference. This river didn't just kill, it recorded. It left us a transcript of failure, of hope misplaced, of mouths open too long and legs that didn't move fast enough. It left us everything but the sound. And that's what you're listening for now. You close your eyes and try to hear it. The river, the herds, the scream of a sinking creature, the rustle of scavengers, the soft sound of dust settling over another open eye. But there's nothing, not even birdsong, only the wind. Only you. You're standing where extinction stood, and you know suddenly how fragile it all is. You know why this place matters. Because it's not just a graveyard, it's a mirror. The light is fading now. Not quickly. This isn't a cinematic sunset. It's the slow, honey-thick kind of dusk that settles deep into the dust and lingers in the bones. You've stopped walking. The fossils stretch out behind you, before you, below you. You are standing on the river of ghosts. It doesn't flow anymore, but you feel the current just the same. It pulls through silence, through stone, through time. There's one last ridge to climb. The ground is soft here, worn smooth by wind and footsteps. You ease your way up, careful not to disturb the loose shale at your sides. And when you reach the top, you see it. The whole riverbed unspooled like a forgotten film reel. Dozens of dig sites, hundreds of bones, thousands of years, all exposed beneath the sky like the earth turned itself inside out to show you what it hides. You sit, just for a moment, because you need to. The river below you isn't loud. It doesn't roar with fossil dust or howl with ancient teeth. It hums, low and steady, not in sound, but in story. A pressure in your chest, a weight in your throat. You feel it. Everyone does. That's why they come here. That's why they stay. Odd fact. Some fossils here have been uncovered, documented, and then deliberately reburied. Scientists call it protective reinterment. The bones are too fragile to move, too important to leave out. So they're buried again under safer layers. A second funeral, a second forgetting, but they're still there. Historians still debate whether this river should be left alone, entirely turned into a no-touch preserve, or if its fossils are too valuable not to dig. There's no consensus, just pressure, from time, from science, from silence. You brush your fingers along the ground, feeling the fine grit collect under your nails. Somewhere down there beneath your palm is a creature no one's seen in 70 million years. Maybe it was a hunter. Maybe it was hunted. Maybe it was just thirsty. You wonder if it saw the water ripple before it stepped, if it felt the pull, if it fought. The river didn't kill everything. Some creatures survived. Some migrated. Some adapted. You know this because you did too. We did. Long after the river dried, long after the last mammoth fell and the last feather drifted into dust, we arrived. And now we dig, and we name, and we argue, and we draw lines in rock and color them with meaning. But the river, it doesn't care. It just keeps its record. Soft as breath, stubborn as stone, you rise slowly. The wind has picked up again, cooler now, dragging shadows behind the hills. You can almost hear the whisper of claws on mud, the heavy tread of herds, the chatter of early humans trying to make sense of the bones underfoot. This isn't just a fossil bed, it's a keeper of time. It holds the weight of everything that tried to live, that succeeded, that failed, that wanted something simple, food, water, warmth, and paid for it with permanence. And who you were just visiting. And so you step back from the edge, the river fading behind you like a dream half remembered. The light softens, the world holds still, and beneath your feet the bones continue their long silence. You've seen the hunger of the drought, the shimmer of false promise, the claw marks of scavengers who thought they were smarter. You've walked with shadows of giants, followed feather trails through stone, heard whispers in broken ribs and twisted spines. But you also saw the absurdity, the gut-wrenching detail of a lizard in a theropod's stomach, the fossilized sneeze of a creature that didn't quite evolve a nose yet, the beauty, the tragedy, the mud-caked miracle of it all. Because this place wasn't just death, it was persistence, a river that took yes, but also told. Told us how things moved, how they hoped, how they failed, and how they left their shapes behind so that one day someone like you would find them. And wonder. And listen. So go gently now. Let the wind brush the dust from your shoulders. And when you turn off the light tonight, remember, the river may be gone, but the story still flows.